Hello and welcome to a special webinar from the CLV Group looking at their groundbreaking guidebook to the US football fans market. I'm your host, James Cooper, and I'm delighted to have alongside me CEO of the CLV Group, not an easy thing to say, Neil Joyce, and highly experienced football finance expert, Professor Rob Wilson. A warm welcome to you both, and so much to chat about as we dig a lot deeper into the CLV guidebook, Hearts, Minds, Wallets, a document you can access by visiting clvfandom.com. That's clvfandom.com. We'll be looking at what's at stake in the US market, who's at the front of the grid, how others can catch up in the race to the 2026 World Cup, and talking rock stars, celebs, and huge numbers. But first, anyone watching this right now will have two fundamental questions, Neil, and they're easy ones. Why the US and why now?
Thanks, James. Nice, easy ones to start off with.
They get the ball rolling nicely.
I was about to throw that one over to Rob, but I probably should answer it, given you asked me the question. So, look, there's various layers of why the US, right? I think the pure scale of the US market stands out for all of us. Like, we've identified 88 million soccer fans or football fans to anyone listening or watching from home here in the UK. Massive stat that's really important within all of that. 42% of that 88 million haven't chosen a European football team that they want to support. So they're crazy about soccer and football, but they haven't tied their colours to a mast at the moment. They like the Premier League, they like La Liga, but they haven't picked a team. So that pure scale size is really interesting when you consider the overall size of soccer fandoms in the UK. It's around a similar amount to that undecided audience of like 30 odd million. So immediately we're like, well, wow, there's so many people. But how much money do the Premier League clubs make out of those US fans? Right, it's well documented around the NBC broadcast deal. I think it's like 2.6 billion over like 4 or 5 year period. So significant revenue making its way to Premier League, distilled through to some of those clubs as well. But they're not directly driving revenue out of those fan bases. So you look at all of the revenues associated with Premier League teams, they're relatively static now. Right? The match day revenues, unless you increase capacity, can't go up. Broadcast deals, game by game, are static when you consider the Sky deal. There's more games for more money, but on a per game basis, it's gone down a little bit. And then you're looking at sponsorship revenues, which the last time I looked at a Premier League interview behind a manager, there's only so many more logos you can put on the back of that screen that you've got right now. So you need to look at different revenues. And we believe that the US provides the most obvious a market for a Premier League to go in. One, because of the passion that the US fans have for sport, also the size of the population like we've just mentioned there, and that huge unknown and undecided audience that they can go after as well.
Rob, some of those statistics are staggering. You look through the report and you think, blimey, this is staring everyone in the face, but there's so much depth to what CLV have done. It's a real opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah, look, the Premier League has been trying to export its product ever since its inception back in 1992, and none of those clubs have really cracked the global marketplace. They have fans all across the world. You look at Manchester United, they'll say they've got something like 1 billion followers across the globe in different territories, but nobody has really been able to get a foothold in some of those territories. And you know, look across at the Far East, the amounts that those fans or followers are prepared to spend is quite small by comparison to other areas. And the US market is really mature. They've got cultural history in watching, consuming, critically buying stuff from their sporting products, from their big assets. You know, $150 for a start off NHL jersey, or you know, probably upwards of $200 for an NBA replica jersey. The pay-per-view monies that they spend are much higher than what we have in the UK. So as a market, it's really mature, and I find it quite weird that no Premier League team has really tried to engage in the market properly, and that they dot around, don't they, with their pre-season tours, and they'll kind of rotate. So they might go to Australia one year, they might go into the Far East another year, drop into Thailand, or you know, a bit of South America or North America. But nobody's really gone in to capture the market. And as Neil just said, you know, you've got fairly static media rights, you've got very challenging environment with regard to commercial and sponsorship opportunities. We've got a brick wall behind us, and it's almost like when you see a manager getting interviewed, you could just pick a different brick for a different sponsor. Yeah. It's really cluttered. So how else can you generate revenue to get around things like profitability and sustainability, or financial fair play, or whatever the regulatory context is today, tomorrow, next week, because it'll probably change? You have to look at that revenue pillar that is completely untapped. And I think that's where, well, the Guidebook is really interesting, but also the US market, I think, is kind of ready and waiting for somebody to go in and try and capture it. And nobody's done that yet.
You're spot on there, Rob, with that state of readiness is like really important, and I think sometimes it does get overlooked, right? You think about it, the US market per se, they're used to being sold to, right? They're a huge consumer market, right? They adopt products at scale, they adopt them a lot quicker than a lot of other markets as well. The stats that we talked about earlier on, James, as well, and it just shows the pure size of that marketplace is there. They like being sold to.
Yeah.
Right, and that's something that isn't necessarily the same to be said of like domestic fans in the UK, right? Monetization is a dirty word, whereas in the US they're used to it, right? They've had the education around all the other sports, like you used the example of the NHL jerseys as well. Like they're huge consumers of streaming technologies and platforms as well, right? This isn't going to be a huge leap for them to start spending money directly with these clubs, but finding the right proposition. It's always been the challenge as well.
But to give you another why question, why has no one found that silver bullet when we're very good at patting ourselves on the back as a Premier League vehicle and saying, oh, we're great at marketing it, and yet there seems to be this kind of disconnect with this market that's wide open?
Yeah, the focus has been in different areas, James, to be like perfectly blunt, around those areas, all right? The Premier League has done a brilliant job of marketing and selling its product, right? And the clubs haven't necessarily had to worry about doing it for the reasons Rob mentioned around some of the revenue pressures versus the increase in costs that they're getting. Clubs are looking at ways in which they can grow their revenues, right? And they have to be creative and they're having to work harder than they've ever had to work. So all of these moving parts are coming together, and so timing has been a really important thing now versus where the focus has been previously as well.
Do you think they've also got low-hanging fruit though? So since the inception of the Premier League and the kind of emergence of some of these big superpowers, you know, the Manchester Uniteds, the Cities, the Arsenals, the Liverpools, they have extant followings, don't they? So they're easy, they're low-hanging fruit. You know, if you want to go and do a tour, you're probably going to go to a territory where there is at least a footprint for your team so you can sell a few tickets. And that's easy. You don't really need to be a smart marketeer or salesperson to be able to generate that. But once that market is saturated, once that low-hanging fruit, to use that analogy, has been picked, you've got this massive market that is, in your guidebook, undecided, that follow soccer, that are interested in the product, and it might be the Liga product. It might be that they're interested in Real Madrid or Barcelona or PSG, but they've not decided that they want to really consume that team. So when the Premier League is going over, or teams in the Premier League are going over to the States, they're not truly activating their brands. They're not truly engaging with fans in those territories. They're not overly strategic about the places they play in. You know, probably have to look back probably a decade to when Manchester United played Real Madrid in the big house in Michigan. They sold out 110,000. But they've never followed that up. Neither club has followed that up because they've then decided to hop to China or to Thailand or to Singapore or Australia. So you get this scattergun approach to what they're trying to activate rather than a concentration of activity to win hearts, minds, and therefore the wallets, don't you?
But I mean, I've been on those tours, and you get the third shirt being released, and then you get people saying, "Oh, we made this from tickets and that from tickets, and we sold out." You know, the big house was amazing. But these are very, very small bit compared to the sort of figures you're talking about from a long-term relationship and unlocking that market.
Yeah, 100%. And like it's where we see a lot of the focus of the clubs that we work with, and not just in football but across sport as well. There's a lot of optimization, like a lot of investment in those areas, which is obvious, right? There is low-hanging fruit, and I think they have invested correctly by trying to capture more share of wallet out of the existing fans that they've got. But as you mentioned there, Rob, there's going to be a point of saturation, right? How much more money can you truly extract out of the fans that are already engaging and spending money with you versus people that are doing nothing, right? And I think the guidebook is like our lens that we're shining on where the real opportunity lies. So like optimization is great and you drive incremental revenue. And obviously a lot of the clubs have got quite aggressive goals around selling more tickets, selling more jerseys ahead of their US tours this year. But they've got much bigger e-commerce objectives as well. They've also got a lot more pressures in terms of driving new revenue sources as well. So that's why this bigger pool of fans and undecided fans out there is where a lot of effort needs to go. Not necessarily saying that it is in those areas at the moment, but from our experience and discussions with a lot of these clubs, they're starting to pay a lot more attention to it as well.
It's interesting, the guy, because you talk about Premier League clubs, but it's very much a European report. And one of the things we raise is perhaps the Premier League clubs face is against the guys from La Liga and the PSGs, perhaps. Real Madrid leading the way because of the success, because of the icons. Barcelona not far behind. So there's kind of a double threat here, isn't there?
There's absolutely huge threats of it, and I think you can't discount the natural organic growth of the MLS as well. Like, you've also got the other sports in the US market as well, but La Liga are being very open. Like, the CEO of La Liga is actively campaigning for competitive live games to be put over in the US in the not too distant future as well. PSG has been a huge success story in the US market. One, in terms of the growth of its fan base, they've grown 34% in about the last 12 to 15 months, albeit from a much smaller standing start than a United or a Real or a Barcelona on that level. They've also really innovated. And they've thought very clearly around the lifestyle brand that PSG could stand for. Paris being one of the fashion capitals of the world, thinking about the alignment with Nike, with the Air Jordan logo going on their jerseys. The Galacticos, well, they were the Galacticos, no longer in place there, but you look at Messi, Neymar Jr. and Mbappe, they really put together a really good storytelling capability around this brand and what it could resonate with. They launched the flagship store probably before many of the other clubs have in New York as well. So you've got really good ingredients that are resonating with fans, and it's really bringing a formula together to allow you to unlock those opportunities.
But therein lies another opportunity for these clubs, because without the Galacticos at PSG, you kind of think, where's the next bus, don't you?
100%. And James, one of the things that we really made sure that we did in the guidebook as well is that whilst the revenue opportunity for PSG looks high, we've got a very strong sign of caution around how realistic that revenue opportunity is for them, with the likely fall off in engagement and fandom now that Messi is bringing fans hand over foot into Miami, along with the fact that PSG haven't been as successful in the Champions League, for instance, as well as the likes of Real and some of the emerging clubs that are coming through as well.
And within that, you've also got the demographics in the market.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about an early 40s guy following a team. We're talking about a 16 to 24-year-old demographic that consume sport in a very, very different way to how, with the greatest respect, the three of us might consume it. And increasing those 16 to 24s are following athletes, not teams.
Yeah.
So the point you've just made there about Neymar Jr., about Messi and about Mbappe for PSG really does add a cautionary tale for them, because who is the next athlete that is going to be followed? Because you saw hordes of fans follow Messi when he went to Inter Miami, which is why that activation is becoming so impressive. Ronaldo, when he went to Al Nassr, Manchester United's Twitter account dropped in terms of its number of followers because they migrated to Al Nassr as a consequence of Ronaldo going. So, and you've got Jude Bellingham now at Real Madrid. He's probably the next emerging superstar, and Mbappe, of course, gone to Madrid. So these English teams are going to have to work really, really hard to generate that fandom and that progression into market, because they don't necessarily have the athletes for those 16 to 24-year-olds to follow.
You're spot on. That point around the demographics is sometimes gets glossed over, and everyone's like, well, fans are fans, when really they're not, right? You said there that the audience size is a lot younger in that market. Creativity is going to be key. It might not even just be with the athlete or the star player and that. It's actually the format that you want to present, the club within. And a lot of people talk about short formats now. YouTube is the go-to to really watch the highlights or actually watch the game for that kind of audience that you mentioned on there. But it's also thinking about, we've seen what Juventus have done when they created animation that's really clearly guided towards the 16 to 13-year-olds as well. So it's one, understanding that this is an investment in building fandom and knowing that there's lifetime value to be gained through that fandom, and it's not going to come through the traditional sources. I think many of us here who support football teams, it's come down through generations, through geography, or in some cases through success or not so much success. So I think it's just underlining the point that your level of fandom is influenced by where you've come from. And I think that can come into the US as well, where we know there's a huge Hispanic following of the US, not just in North America, but obviously in South America as well. And again, Real Madrid are, in our minds, like clearly ahead in that regard, given the plethora of talent that they've got from Brazil in that squad at the moment.
But it's really interesting with the mentality, isn't it? In this country, we kind of all irk and get excited when we feel as though we're being taken advantage of when season ticket prices go up. Well, the shirt is that for a standard shirt, that for a match-worn shirt. In terms of the US, that they don't mind being taken advantage of. They realise almost they're part of the game, don't they?
Yeah, it's the point. They're in a highly consumable market, and they're used to being sold to. And here, it's very different. It feels like you got that divine right. They're your club, and you should not be sold to. It should be your choice to buy the product. Whereas in the US, they've employed enhanced targeting techniques from marketing and advertising for a long, long period of time. A lot of that is here in this market, but in different industry verticals. We all get sold to every single day. Every time you turn on the TV, every time you go online. On social media, like there's products being presented to you all of the time. It's just not football products, right? If it's football products, we all throw our arms up in the air.
Roland, just ask you, I think one of the most common questions you probably get asked is football a proper business? And there's probably a very long and probably a very short answer. My answer to that is no, it's not.
That's a very short answer.
We wouldn't be chatting if it was.
Yeah.
But is it about Premier League clubs being a bit more sexy and getting it like big business does? I mean, Neil's background is in big business. They know how to monetize fans and know how to monetize people within industry. Have the Premier League clubs got to play catch up and just realise we've got to be more sophisticated here?
In a word, yes, they do. Neil used a phrase earlier. Monetisation is considered to be a bit of a dirty word. And it's dirty because we have this ingrained cultural resonance with our teams that we support. So if you're a season ticket holder, you feel a right to be able to go and watch your team play at a price that you can definitely afford and it's artificially suppressed and that you won't be sold to. So, you know, in a business context, season ticket holders are not worth having because they don't generate the revenues that are required to sign the next Mbappe or the next Jude Bellingham. They simply don't spend money, right? The demographics increasing, so the average age of a season ticket holder is increasing. Their average spend is decreasing because they just literally turn up to a game. They might have a drink, a pie at half time. They might buy a program, but ultimately they're low spending fans. There's a really big conflict between sport tourists, so those people that are coming in to watch that team because they followed them for a long time. They actually are really lucrative to a club. So, you know, a fan from the Far East that flies over to Old Trafford to watch Manchester United play Newcastle, they might spend £500 or £600 in the megastore. Yeah. You know, buying replica jerseys, buying tracksuits, buying all sorts of different merchandise. They're really valuable. So what clubs have got to do is work out a methodology to look after those cultural fans, those fans that will be with that team through thick and thin, or thin and thin, as my father-in-law often says to me, but also establish a way of accessing and engaging those followers or those potential fans, because they could be really lucrative, and they ultimately can be the difference between the signing of the superstar striker or the brilliant centre-back or the goalkeeper, your compliance with the regulatory framework, the winning of a cup, the winning of the Premier League. And I think all clubs need to just appreciate that we're probably not talking about 3 revenue streams anymore. You know, your typical media rights, commercial sponsorship revenue, and then match day. There's a 4th pillar, which is this huge following we have globally. Neil's focusing today on North America because of the maturity in that market, but there is a huge following, and if you can understand how to activate or monetize those followers, that's brilliant for a season ticket holder, because actually it's that money that pushes down that season ticket holder's price.
I think like that balancing act's like pivotal within all of this as well, and I think one of the interesting points that you pulled out there is we talk about like direct to consumer businesses, and James, as you mentioned, a lot of my previous background and a lot of what CLV's done has been in those areas, working with strategies to help go through the acquisition phase of customers all the way through to nurturing, development, retention, lifetime value being a really important metric on that. And arguably, you could look at some of these clubs and say you need to have a direct-to-consumer division that is less focused on those optimization routes and the general match day fan, and really focus on a growth agenda where, just like all these other businesses, you're running a program to identify that audience, what the propositions need to be, bring them on board to the club, and they're going to look very, very different to someone who goes to the Etihad or Old Trafford every single week. And it's okay.
Yeah.
Right, but you got to balance the revenues you get there with commercial development and also fan development and win backs to the fans that go every single week.
But the report itself, or the guidebook, is utterly forensic in what you do. You've not given all the crown jewels, but you've given some of them. Are you surprised when you're talking to football clubs that they're not as forensic? That there's a word, guesswork, is used in the guidebook, and it's been based on that so far, isn't it?
It's held them back, right? It's not their limitation. It's that the data hasn't existed to fuel the business case, right? All of these clubs business case through how much money can we generate out of the US, and they haven't had the data that supports the argument. So I'm not here to criticise that they haven't done it before. They haven't had the data and the confidence to go do it, and also some of the pressures that we mentioned before on here as well.
But the depth of that data is astonishing. You can find out what people are buying, when they're buying, how they're buying, and how loyal they are. You can present all those things to football clubs, can't you?
Yeah, 100% we can. I mean, look, there's a bit of Big Brother sometimes we get accused of in here, and look, we argue the point that this has existed within any retail environment for the last 50, 60 years, right? Tesco's with their club card, Nectar at Sainsbury's, right?
Took the words right out of my mouth.
Huge tranches of data, and they built brilliant loyalty programs that have grown their business, right? Think back to the 90s, Tesco's. They were number 3 or 4 in the marketplace, and they became number 1 because they invested in a loyalty program, the club card, and all of the data with it gave them competitive advantage. We see huge parallels that could be replicated within sport, football, absolutely.
I think the other thing about it is I think we've got 9 teams touring the US this summer.
Yeah.
I think if Everton get taken over, then I think it's 10 teams in the Premier League, including my Ipswich Town, who have US ownership. You are kind of preaching to the converted and people who know the market, aren't you, here?
Yeah, that point around the ownership structure of those clubs is really important. We think that's one of the underlying catalysts that will make many of the things we talk about in the guidebook actually come to life as well, because again, they're capitalists at heart. Right? They know that they invested in product, which is the game itself, but they know that there's fans and audiences. Anyone who run numbers around any of the investments or acquisitions of clubs over the last 5 years or so has done it with the growth agenda in mind. They're not going to invest in the Premier League clubs just as is. They know that there's international expansion that goes far beyond selling more rights. They know that there's a direct-to-consumer landscape, because that's where a lot of their pedigree comes from as well. And they've got businesses in those portfolios. You look at Todd Bowley's done huge amount with sport. He's got loads of fintech investments as well. You look to the combination of the Glazers and now Ineos Sport as well. This is big business, multi-sports, internally within sports, and also the other businesses that they've touched as well.
Right, I do want to draw parallels with the rush to the Far East in the 90s.
Yeah.
There, you've got different time zones, you've got different language, you've got different food, everything's different. It's a completely different part of the world. And yet, I think they would romance the Premier League clubs by just the scale of numbers. This is a different proposition, isn't it?
Very different, yeah. And it goes back to the point about low-hanging fruit. So if you go into a huge market, a couple of billion people in the Far East, across those territories, chances are you're going to pick up 2 or 3% of those by doing a tour, and you can sell a few shirts. But the cultural differences mean you have to work much, much harder to activate over the lifetime of that fan. And that's what's really interesting about the work Neil's doing, is we're not talking about revenue generated in a single season. We're talking about how to generate revenue on a recurring basis for the lifetime of that fan. So you could have 50, 60, 70 years worth of income from that single follower. And it doesn't have to be $1,000 a year. It could be $10 a year over the lifetime of that fan, which is where it gets really interesting. And the points there that Neil made about the increase in US ownership, back to your question, means that the sophistication from the business side of these organisations to better align brands, to activate better partnerships. So, we touched on, Nike, PSG, Mbappe, Air Jordan, almost a brilliant symmetry, which is captivating for a market that is more mature and is ready to be sold to in that way. And I think that's unique in the US right now. And it's probably the closest you get to a UK / European market, albeit with not necessarily more disposable income, but income that they're prepared to dispose of to engage with the club that they follow. Yeah,
you're spot on. I think the Far East side of things, pure numbers, clearly drove a lot of that, but also those markets are highly attractive to a lot of the club sponsors at the time, right? They want to go and gain market share in those areas. They spend money in brand awareness initiatives. Sponsorship drove a lot of that decision making as well into those markets.
I want to talk celebrities. I want to talk rock stars, but I want to also mention a couple
You
of
got
names.
two here, man.
Absolutely, we'll deal with that. the Rob Wilson effect. I want to talk about a couple of names that I didn't expect to kind of pop up in the guidebook in terms of teams. All the kind of usual suspects were there. The Liverpools, the Manchester Uniteds, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Villa, and Tottenham Hotspur are hot tips though.
Yeah. Tottenham in particular has done a phenomenal job over the last 5-6 years or so. Ever since they really got into the Champions League, they went on tour to the US straight away, played games, started to engage with those audiences as well over there. So they picked up a huge amount of fans. They grew theirs by 15%, their fan base in the US market. That was done on the back of the Champions League and going to a live tour game over in the US as well. Along with the fact of the last World Cup, I believe from living in the US as well, that Harry Kane was fairly popular with US audiences, and England's success, obviously, at that last World Cup helped with some of that growth on there. We see that obviously Tottenham have gone to Asia this summer, post-season game, then they're doing pre-season tour games over in that region as well. So the focus is clearly there around some optimisation initiatives given some of the players that they have. Whereas Aston Villa obviously qualified for the Champions League. We think there's a lot of parallels with what Tottenham did. They also have the Colombian footballer, albeit he's rumoured to be potentially on the move. He played for Chicago Fire. So there's fandoms that are associated with him in the US market already, along with South American fans. So Aston Villa have got a really good opportunity to really reach new audiences. How big those audiences can truly get to is to be determined. However, the ingredients are there for them to be as successful as what Tottenham have been in the US.
So the secret here, trying to get back on side, Rob, I haven't been rude to you, is about kind of spinning plates here, isn't it? You can keep all markets happy, can't you?
Yeah, you can. I think the biggest issue I've had with how Premier League teams have conducted themselves over the last 20, 30 years is they haven't really gone for a market. They've tried to be all things to all people and almost sort of a people-pleasing strategy that might get that easy picking fruit. But when you look across the European landscape, look back at the Deloitte Annual Review of Football Finance that was released for this year. Serie A and the Bundesliga are the two biggest, proportionally the biggest rises in their revenues, right? 22% I think it was, compared to the Premier League, which is 10 or 11%. So these other leagues are starting to catch up on a revenue basis with the Premier League because they are focusing much more intently on specific markets. And that is good business sense. If you identify a key target market, you start to really drive your activity within that market. And I think what the Premier League teams have done is try to do too much to too many, which is why, again, going back to the guidebook, there are so many undecided followers in the States because nobody's really tried to capture them. And I think that's where these teams have really got an opportunity to pull back away from the likes of Serie A, La Liga, the Bundesliga, because if they don't, the PSGs, the Real Madrids, the Barcelonas, the Bayern Munichs, the Juventuses will begin to overtake. And that spells trouble for me as a Premier League advocate, because as soon as those other leagues become more competitive and generate more revenues, they'll start attracting the best players and the best coaches, and therefore they will get bigger in revenue terms, and the Premier League will start lagging behind, which again is why it's interesting that Spurs and Villa come out quite strongly as a kind of outside bet for where this revenue prospect might go, because we're not just talking about the Uniteds, the Liverpools, the Arsenals, Chelseas, Manchester Cities.
That continual theme, right, of focus on a market, look beyond today, right? There's clearly revenues to be driven out of the summer tour. We look at it, the summer tours as providing like that halo, right? Before the new season starts, you've got some more awareness, you've fostered more relationships directly with some of those fans in that market. But what are you going to do after the tour?
Yeah.
Right, that's what the program really has to look at. Like we've identified where these fans are, the audiences, the propositions. We can help sell more tickets now. We can sell more jerseys around the games. There's things we can actively help clubs do. It's like, what do you do after it? That's the piece around investing time and effort and resource against it.
It's basic legacy, isn't it? You know, you look at any major Olympics.
It's a dirty word in English football, legacy, isn't
right, it? But isn't it? Because you think, right, well, we've got this major event, we're going to build a bunch of facilities, a bit of infrastructure, and once the games or the competition is finished, we're going to have loads of people participating in sport. It's a total nonsense, right? Even the inspiration effect is a total nonsense. You get a short-term spike, and then it drops down, and it's because they don't plan for after. So if it's an Olympic sport, there aren't enough coaches, there aren't enough grassroots clubs, people can't go and participate, so your participation drops. You can't just go and host a game and expect a following to then be to have a duration for more than about 6 or 12 months after.
But it's also got to be now, hasn't it? Because then the roadblock becomes blocked very quickly. 2025, you've got the World Cup in America. 2026, clearly the World Cup and all roads leading there. But it's kind of about making these things now and getting the next 2 years in order, isn't it?
It's 100% there. Like, some of this is on the clubs, 100% on there. And look, I've had lots of debate in the public domain as well around the dreaded let's have live Premier League games actually hosted in the US. I'm a massive advocate for it, which I know doesn't go down well with certain circles. And as a fan, my heart certainly feels that way. My head looks at it and says, look at what the NFL's done.
But if we don't do it, someone else does as well.
The Liga are going to do it. It's a question of when. So I think it's a case of like really working through like the logistics of it, the communication strategy to the match day or the season ticket fans here, looking at what the price implications might be for doing it in a smart way and not doing it immediately. There's a really big argument that, as you said, like there's 7 Premier League clubs going to the US this summer. Like, well, get them all out there for some pre-season games and then run the first weekend of the Premier League season over in the US.
Mm. We also spent a long time talking about the Messi effect. I think they've probably got to keep him even playing on one leg till 2026 to make sure that the MLS is doing the job.
100%.
But to flip the Messi effect, you know, the ticket prices are extraordinary for the Copa America right now. People are having to pay an arm and a limb to get to see, you know, pre-season football. Could that play into people's hands in terms of the US market and the fans there thinking actually Premier League stuff might be more of a bargain than watching my own hometown club?
It could be, or you do replicate that pricing model over there, right? It's yield management, right? When it really comes down to it, we looked at like the Dallas Cowboys average revenue per fan around $90 per season, right? It's because of the ticket prices that they generate. You look at like the other Premier League clubs, it's between 50p and £2.50 per fan. But they've got the scale of fans, but it's about identifying them. And short term, the fans that you're going to get to Giant Stadium to watch the first Premier League game between Arsenal and Chelsea in 2025, they're going to spend $300 a ticket. Right? That's nearly a third of the overall season ticket price you charge in the UK. Yeah. And you've got that for one game.
That comes back to a cultural thing, doesn't it? You know, in the States, they're used to spending triple digits on a ticket. I remember when I went to watch an All-Stars game in the ice hockey, it's like $260 a ticket. You know, the stadium, the arena wasn't 100% full, but the average ticket price was like $220. You think to yourself, hang on, this is just an exhibition game, and people are flocking. The arena's full of people in replica kits with, you know, whatever merchandise they could lay their hands on. It is a serious entertainment business. And I think that's the biggest difference I see between the Premier League and what a lot of the American sports do, is they're almost scared of accepting that it's entertainment. Yeah. And if you accept that it's entertainment, you can start doing some really creative things with it. And goodness me, you know, if the NFL can come over to London, if the NBA can go into other parts of Europe, why on earth aren't we having a Premier League fixture somewhere, or even a Community Shield as an exhibition game pre-season?
So I want to throw a curveball in the shape of Wrexham, because they understand creativity, they understand Hollywood, they understand the razzmatazz and the glitz and everything like that. Could they be an outlier that make life difficult for the Premier League, or is it about success more than it is Hollywood?
They are going to be a success story in their own right for a specific audience type, right? How scalable that is, I think there's a question mark on it, but they've certainly captured the American market, right? In terms of awareness, the show Welcome to Wrexham, like, it immediately put them on the map, and no one had ever heard of Wrexham in there. Ryan Reynolds is like, wow, right? He's fandom in its own right. Ryan Reynolds brought fandom to Wrexham, not the other way around, and that is the real like lesson in all of these things. Like, Wrexham is sponsored by United Airlines now. Like, you go on a United Airlines flight at the moment, which I'm prone to do, and you get presented with a Wrexham hack when you go on there, right? So they have done something very, very incredible. How sustainable that is long term, I don't know. Ultimately, if they want to scale their fandom in the US, I'd argue that they do need success in the major competitions, but they're on track to get promoted, right, as well.
But you make a really important point about CLV as a business as well, as one that we should recognise. It's not a British company saying this is how we do things in the States. You've got a massive footprint in the States. You understand how it works internally as well as externally, don't you?
Yeah, I've personally worked in Asia, lived in America for 3 years or so. Europe-wide as well. So we've got a good viewpoint around different businesses, different markets and different models. And ultimately, the fandoms and audiences and customers are what this is all about. I think going back to Rob's point there, one of the things we would argue again around is that creation of a direct-to-consumer business that is an entertainment business within the club, rather than the club positioning itself as an entertainment brand, because I think there's some misgivings of doing it. But having a dedicated, focused department would be our recommendation about going around these things.
The guidebook itself is looks beautiful. It's and it's sexy because it's got stars in it.
Yeah.
You know, the likes of Harry Styles. It's got Rihanna mentioned and all those sort of things. But in a very serious point and a fundamental block for Premier League clubs potentially is get celebrities on board, make them think that they're worth it, and then catch the fans on the back of that.
It's that hook, right? You just mentioned there is like, and the recognition is that these are fans of those artists first and foremost, no different to their fans of the Los Angeles Lakers first and foremost. Football and soccer is not the thing that whole market has grown up with. They're fans of something else first. Well, that's the real message in the guidebook is understand they're bringing their fans to you rather than it being you bringing fans to that market. And that's like the massive difference on it. Like the opportunities there has been laid bare by what Taylor Swift has done for the NFL and for the Chiefs, right? And look what she's done in the UK over the last, 10 days or so.
Is she the most powerful person in the world, by the way, at the moment?
Probably. There's a good argument to say,
Travis Kelce on the stage with her,
you
know, participating in the concert, creates a resonance with Kansas City Chiefs and NFL supporters. And that, again, goes back to that alignment of brands and business and how you can do your D2C marketing.
But we look at this through a lens of the clubs. The stars would like some of that love as well, wouldn't they?
Yeah. There's mutual benefit, right? There's clear value in kind that can be created. There's clear monetary values that the music artists can command as well. There's clear synergy around some of their European concerts, around fans and hosting it in their stadiums as well. Merchandising opportunities. There's lots of money to be made all around. It's this concept of an ecosystem that revolves around that fan. Fans are consumers as well. And I think that's one of the biggest points of differentiation within all of this guidebook.
But anyone who reads the guidebook will kind of think this is simple. Once you get it, it's obvious, isn't it?
That's the beauty of what we're trying to do, right? There's a lot of complexity in the underlying data, and that's why we've created a business, right? But our job is to simplify it with concepts that aren't rocket science, but it's about understanding what consumer or fan preferences really look like across different categories, so you align yourselves with different sports stars, music stars. Also in the case within a guidebook, within anime, one of the largest growing verticals of entertainment in the world. Doesn't necessarily jump to the three of us without looking at the data, but it was one of the most surprising things when we pulled this data together. There's huge opportunities there, but it's understanding what that audience cares about, where they are, and what the value proposition needs to be in terms of bringing them in and then nurturing those relationships.
I thought one of the other distinct differences between the US market in terms of fandom and this country as well is it's part of a portfolio of sports. You know, so you're not an Ipswich Town fan and that's it.
Yeah.
You're a fan of maybe 5 or 6 different clubs and different sports.
Well,
It's really interesting.
And artists, because no doubt you're an Ed Sheeran fan.
He's done wonders for us, absolutely.
But again, there's the alignment, and it's it's now Premier League, but when it was Championship, the point still remains. You might be talking about a slightly smaller audience.
No, the sale of our shirts is incredible just because it's got Ed's name on it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned Harry Styles earlier. At the Luton Manchester United game back in February, when Luke Shaw did his hamstring, there was probably more stills of Harry Styles at Kenilworth Road than there was any other fan in that stadium.
Yeah, it was.
And what are Manchester United doing to activate the fact that he's a Man United fan?
Yeah.
You know, why is he at Kenilworth Road watching them when he could be at Old Trafford, like Ed Sheeran is at Portman Road, on the television, and then having an association, and then, you know, who knows, create an anime with Harry Styles and a few of the Manchester United youngsters, and, you know, you start to activate then, don't you?
He's got very creative all of a sudden.
I mean, I think he might have read the guidebook as well.
He's got it, hasn't he? Absolutely. But these are kind of fundamentals we're talking about. This isn't difficult stuff.
No. It takes, like, we talk about the 4 C's within the guidebook as well, and I won't ad nauseum it right now, but one of the most important things is, like, creativity within all of it, like thinking differently around the propositions. There's got to be collaboration. Clubs can't do this all on their own, right? They don't have all of the assets required to win the hearts, minds and wallets of these US fans as well. The commitment to cultivation of those relationships when you got them is going to be really, really key within all of this as well. And then connecting, like connecting with those fans is the thing that's the hardest thing to do, and identifying those fans and what propositions are going to resonate. So it's like those 4 C's coming together is like really, really important.
Does your data show that once you do connect with them, that you've got them, Rob said 60, 70 years, that you could have them for life?
Yeah, you certainly can. Like, it's about migrating them through that value curve as soon as you get them on. Like, we looked at the demographic splits, and clearly there's a lot of focus on the younger generation. There's still fans in the US that have started to support football over the last 4 or 5 years, right? But that's because the organic product in that market is growing as well, right? MLS is becoming a lot bigger now. Beckham really was a catalyst, I think, realistically, to doing it. Messi's really the second wave of that coming along now. The US men's and women's soccer teams are both been relatively successful in the last few years, and then you've got the holy grail of the World Cup coming down there.
But life after the World Cup, does that become a trigger for even more potential riches rather than just being a full stop?
Yeah, it has to be. Look, there's a catalyst right now, which is we look at it as a race, right? 2026, is it a hard line, it all stops? No, right? But you've got essentially 2 years to really try and drive your product or your brand and your club proposition into those audiences. Those 36 million haven't decided at the end of the World Cup still. There's still going to be some undecided. You've still got to keep going. Still got to develop the revenue generation and fan experiences for those supporters that you have picked up over those periods of time as well.
Is success key to this all on the pitch, or are there now mitigating factors? We talked about kind of celebs and the Harry Styles and Ed Sheeran and things like that. Can you almost use that as a fudge because you're not doing well? Look at our hero.
I think ultimately the product that they're most passionate about will end up needing to be the product they see on TV or on the pitch, to drive long term out of it. Like, being a Harry Styles fan and then becoming a Man United fan in the US as a byproduct of Harry Styles is one thing, but to drive those revenues over a longer period of time, the product on the pitch and the success has to come as well.
I think it's a great question, James, actually, because we've kind of been brought up in this environment of success. If you get things right on the field, your financial position off it improves, and vice versa. We don't know what the cause and the effect is, by the way, so we don't know which one drives the other. One of the big differences in the US, of course, is that their professional team sport structure is set up to generate success for as many as possible. So a draft system and an unequal distribution of revenue to make sure that every year there's a different winner of the NFL, the Super Bowl, there's a different winner of the NBA, there's a different winner of the NHL and MLB and so on and so forth. So culturally, they're used to different teams winning. So I think we'll start to migrate away from this pure argument that you need to be successful in a sporting sense to capture those fans. Go back to your point about Wrexham. As an emerging team, it's the entertainment, the glitz and the glamour that's helping to activate. So I think it's becoming more sophisticated in how you capture. Sporting performance is absolutely part of that suite of key performance indicators without making this academic. And understanding what those other key performance indicators are, like you've done through the guidebook, I think is where this gets really interesting.
100%. It's like the big focus of the real output of the guidebook, right, is attract the fan, right? Identify them, connect with them, attract them, convert them. Traditional kind of funnel that you'd look at within any marketing business as well. I just personally believe from what we've seen is the storytelling that goes with those fandom has to naturally evolve to reflect the performance on the pitch as well. Right, over a longer term period of time, you've always got a hero, you've always got a villain in a story, you've always got an underdog, and there are million of movies that depict all those things, and that's fine. But the American market is obviously hungry for success, right? We all know that market is about performance. The sports culture is about performance. They've got so many stars, all of those things. Attracting them can be different techniques, and that's why I'm guarded on Wrexham. If Wrexham become a Premier League club, I think that could be a very, very different story for them. But they got a way to go to get to there.
But one of the things that kind of surprised me was the Manchester City effect. I expected them to be higher in the kind of pecking order, bearing in mind they have got their own club over there in New York. And yet maybe it's the heroes and villains thing. I don't know whether it's the fact that the likes of Liverpool and Manchester United have got this history of winning things. But there seems to be some sort of disconnect there, which didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, City have done a really good job. Over the last 10 years of growing their fandom from virtually nothing to what it's got to today. And their growth's still relatively good. It's around 4%. But the lens that everyone has to look at it, and it's why we try to caution a lot of people by looking just at the pure fan growth sizes. PSG's been huge in terms of that stake.
Small market.
But they had a small starting point, right? United, Liverpool, Real Madrid, and Barcelona. They got the largest fan bases in the US.
But Real Madrid are pulling away rather than.
But they've had the biggest. They're not pulling away because like the percentage growth on Real and all those guys, they're all within 4 to 5% growth. But Real has got a much bigger starting point in terms of footprint.
But that's why they're desperate for this game, La Liga, because suddenly you do that and you're burning money, aren't you?
I think Real would like I wouldn't say the danger point for the Premier League clubs, but like they're doing quite well on the pitch. I think last time I checked, right, and yet they've got this huge fandom over there as well.
And then Mbappe arrives.
Yeah. So they could set themselves apart, like not just revenue opportunity, but like growth and sheer volume of fans. And the Premier League needs to take note of that. Like some of that is in the Premier League's control, some of it's in the club's control as well.
Are you sensing that people are listening when it comes to the Premier League clubs? Are they realising that this is an opportunity that they can take advantage of with not too much work by the sounds of it?
Yeah, the biggest thing that they're looking at is like balancing, right? That short term like need to drive optimization, which is where all of them are structured to deliver against that. They've invested in data, technology, teams of people, which we see as really positive, and the clubs are doing a lot in that area. But like to capture these opportunities, they've either got to find ways to outsource that capability, which is what many verticals have done to capture growth in those areas, understand the pure economics involved in doing it, and investing in testing it as well, right? These things aren't about, you're not going to make $1 billion in year one, right? That's not happening for anyone. It's going to be a scaled approach to capturing that market and growing it as well.
But you might make 100 million.
Yeah.
I mean, these are still huge figures.
You're definitely going to make that if you're United and Liverpool are definitely pointing over the next 3 years they could capture over 100 million in US.
Which is phenomenal. Nothing else in any of their markets is doing that other than perhaps player sales.
And it's a 15 to 20% revenue growth year on year.
Yeah.
You know, what other industry can generate that sort of value? And to go back to the regulatory points and back to season ticket holders, what do they want to see? They want to see their clubs successful. And if you can add 100 million quid to your P&L, that's a super striker or the super centre back or
as you said, season tickets going down, so the people in the cold and grey and rain don't think too resentfully of the people over there in the sunshine.
Yeah, and you're not having to fight with broadcasters to try and squeeze up your TV deal. You're not having to go out and negotiate with, you know, some really difficult sponsors because we know there's less sponsorship revenue kicking around in the global marketplace post COVID.
Yeah,
this is revenue that hasn't yet been released. It's there waiting to be spent.
Yeah.
And clubs have got to get real with how they can just activate some of that spending.
Yep.
Nice to have a good news story to tell, isn't it?
It's good. We think it's like all but positive, right?
It's incredible.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. But I think it also hinges on England perhaps winning a World Cup in the US. But without Jude Bellingham, so we've not got the Real Madrid effect.
He can't be player of the tournament.
It's got to be a vehicle for the Premier League, is it? So the two might come together on the back of making more money.
Yeah, the Premier League story, England winning the World Cup would be obviously great for many, many reasons on it. I think it's like looking at some of the clubs and creativity could be the thing that wins this. Like Wrexham have done it without having anything like Mbappe, albeit they do have a couple of star players off the pitch, right? In terms of Ryan Reynolds on there. So I think being creative is like one of the key ingredients for each of these clubs. Also understanding that whilst they do have US fans that they have sitting on their databases and they market to them and they're members of the clubs, the numbers that we look at and everything we talk about in that guidebook, they're not their fans. They know who you are, but you don't know who they are, or they're fans of the Premier League, they haven't picked their team. Right, that is the dynamic and the change in mindset that has to come through with all of these things.
The other thing I thought was interesting, though, the market over here, not talking about us because I think we're past it. They know they've got our money and we're not going to change what we're doing because we're creatures of habit. Yeah. We were talking about my sons. Yeah. They love stars. They love music.
Exactly.
So you don't have to change much of what you're doing to capture a huge amount of people and keep the people here happy, do you?
Exactly. It's about having a very strong sense of how you grow your audience, which is what we do traditionally in other verticals, or grow your customer base. It's taking those techniques. Your point around the UK fandom, there's a lot of learnings that we have in the UK market as well that are similar to how you win the US younger market. Like my son plays Roblox. Right? He's got a skin. He's got the favourite team and his favourite player within that environment. He started off by loving football because he played EAFC. That's a journey that a lot of younger people in the US do. they find their favourite player, they replay the game that they've seen on TV, and that medium and video gaming is really, really important for the clubs to pay attention to in terms of that mechanism to attract that fan, whether it's a younger UK fan or those US fandoms as well.
And it's an ever-growing market then, isn't it? It's not dwindling.
Yeah.
No, because the population of the world is increasing.
Yeah.
Year on year.
And they're happy to
That's
spend
very
it.
profound, Rob.
That's why we got the academic in to tell us that. But you know, and that market is wants to spend. It wants to show that it loves, and it wants maybe to be loved a little bit in return. That's maybe the difference here, isn't it?
Wants to engage.
Yeah.
Talk about your son. Mine's exactly the same. You know, he'll go on to a video game and he wants to wear, you know, if he's playing one game, he wants to wear a particular skin, he wants to be able to unlock a particular player, whatever it is. These behaviours and habits are becoming prevalent in these younger consumers of sport, and we have to, or clubs have to provide an avenue for them to continue that. Otherwise, they'll just stop.
Final question. You knew there was a business opportunity here. You knew that it was good. Did it surprise you how big it was once you kind of crunched the numbers and looked at the data?
Being absolutely honest with you, yeah, like we knew there was an opportunity. The revenue number, right, didn't necessarily surprise us. I think what surprised us was actually the breakdown of like how you can attract and win those fans, like the diversity around what those propositions look like. That's the bit that was a little bit surprising when we actually got into the data on there. We've been looking at these things for about 2 or 3 years now. We put together business cases, we've got spreadsheets, but they're just spreadsheets. This guidebook is beyond any just data report. It's a guidebook that says these are the value propositions and collaborations and industry verticals that you as a club, or the Premier League for that matter, should be identifying with in order to win the hearts, minds, and then the wallets follow.
Fantastic way to finish it. Hearts, minds, wallets. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your company. A fantastic journey across to the US, back across the Atlantic and back. It's been wonderful. Have a look at the guidebook yourself. Go to clvfandom.com. That's clvfandom.com. It's hearts, it's minds, it's wallets. This has been premium content for the CLV Group. Keep your eyes peeled for more coming up.